My name is Professor Niamh Brennan. I'm moderating a discussion, a conversation on the themes that Kieran has raised. And my panellists are Nóirín O'Sullivan, Commissioner for Garda, Síochána, Ingrid, Devin, who is Dell EMEA Diversity and Inclusion Lead, Gina, Quinn, CEO of Dublin Chamber of Commerce, and Mark Ryan, a non-executive director of Wells Fargo. And I should point out that in different ways, I don't have to go into the details, in different ways, all of our panellists are associated with this organisation called the 30% Club. And before I get the conversation going, I want to take time out for an ad break. And the ad break is that the College of Business in UCD is a member of the 30% Club, and as such is sponsoring a female to take up a place on the UCD Diploma in Corporate Governance. And we have an absolutely outstanding scholarship recipient on this year's class. And the good news is that the scholarship for next year's class has just opened this week. We've already had 14 inquiries and 1 application already. And ladies, could I ask you please pass on the word to all of your friends that this wonderful scholarship is available. So that's the end of the ad break. And now over to the panel. And so just to pick up the themes, and I might, Nóirín, start with you. You know, culture is discussed as being very relevant to diversity in the workplace. And you might share some of your insights from maybe your organisation on that front.
Yes, Niamh. I suppose culture in Garda Síochána has been the subject of a lot of commentary, particularly in recent times and certainly over the last number of years, and some of that has tended to be very negative. But I suppose if we look to the future, and particularly the theme of tonight, you know, imagining a better together, certainly from Garda Síochána's perspective, some people might say, what is the Commissioner of Garda Síochána doing sitting in a panel like this? But I think culturally it's very important that we do begin to imagine not just business imagined together is better, but the future imagined together is better. And certainly in the past, Garda Síochána may not have been represented at a panel like this, particularly with industry, academic and business leaders, because it may not have always been seen as the role of Garda Síochána in imagining the economic and social stability of our nation. But I think Garda Síochána has a huge role to play. And even in defining that, I think it shifts the culture of Garda Síochána in a very different way. Obviously, our objective is to serve all of the communities that we serve. So culturally, certainly in terms of diversity, we've come a long way. When I joined Garda Síochána several years ago, when I was only 2, there was less than 1% of women were members of Garda Síochána. Today, we have over 26%. So we have over 5,000 of our members are female. And that's a huge journey in a very short space of time. And again, I think we have to always look to define the culture that's going to bring us forward. We always have to look to the past. And in 1959, when the first women joined Garda Síochána, there were 12 of them. But they have created a huge legacy. But also I think we have to remember the men who created the vision to have those women there in the first place. And then if I look at the journey then right through their journey and up to 1973 when the marriage bar was in place, it's very easy for us to forget the obstacles. And some of what Kieran has said about, you know, looking at the patterns of education in women, if we look across society in that time, the roles of women, and there were very defined roles. And even when I joined on Garda Síochána in 1981, there were very defined and constrained roles for women. And the way I would look at it is that some of these people who were the majority, and absolutely the majority men, it was a sense of protectionism. The thought was that women shouldn't be doing dangerous jobs, they shouldn't be put into dangerous positions. And if I compare ourselves to our closest colleagues in what was the RUC or the PSNI, in 1983, when I became a detective, I was taught how to carry a firearm, I learned how to shoot a firearm. It wasn't until 1994 women in the police service of Northern Ireland, or the then RUC, could carry firearms. So that's in recent history. We don't have to go all the way back to think about it. But if we were to chart the journeys, certainly in terms of the representation of Garda Síochána, our objective is certainly to represent the people that we serve. And it's not just about gender diversity, but it's about inclusivity. And it's about making sure that we actually are representative of the society we serve. So in our recent ad campaign, our last competition 3 years ago, we had 25,000 applicants. In this recruitment campaign, we worked with the Public Appointment Service to make sure we reached into various different communities. Gender, absolutely yes. We made a particular focus on encouraging women to join on Garda Síochána. We made it be seen that they could actually be anything that they wanted to be in Garda Síochána. They were only constrained by their own imaginations in terms of the jobs that they could do across our organisation. But we also reached into the LGBT community. We also reached into hard-to-reach communities, including ethnic minority communities, with a very focused intent was to improve and encourage trust and confidence in Garda Síochána. And I'm very proud today to say that we have a number of minority communities represented. As I've already said, our gender diversity is 26%, but also in our Garda Reserve, who are volunteers that come from the community. It's really interesting because we have countries all the way from Albania to Zimbabwe represented in that. And that certainly does, as Kieran has said in his opening address, it enriches the perspective, it enriches the insight, and it enriches the experience. But also from a board point of view, it allows us to challenge our own assumptions in a very different way than we would have historically. So we're on a huge journey of cultural renewal on Garda Síochána. And we often say, when we try to define culture, it's a whole mosaic of little things that mean a lot. And I think it's great to be here today, to look in the room and see the equal, not quite equal yet, but we're getting there, but the representation of men and women. And I'm certainly delighted that senior male colleagues from Garda Síochána are here tonight, not because they're here with the Commissioner, but because they're here of their own volition. And I think that's a very positive step and an indication of the change in culture of Garda Síochána.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. That's a fascinating, quick story of how much things have come on in the Guards, much more, I think, than any of us would have expected. Mark, when you were lead in Accenture, I think you were particularly known for the level of proactivity in terms of introducing diversity into your firm. So can you share with us a bit about what works in trying to do that, and maybe what doesn't work? What are the pitfalls you'd advise against?
Absolutely, thank you. I think if the situation in Accenture actually started with a problem, a very clear business problem. I mean, we hire what we hope and know are the best graduates from university, and there's no surprise that 50% happen to be male and 50% happen to be female. And yet when we began to look at a period of time, this is about 10, 11 years ago, we noticed that we were having attrition. Our females were leaving the workforce at different stages in a sort of a ratio of 3 to 1 in terms of males. So I described it at the time as a sort of a time bomb, that if you extrapolate it forward, and which we would be continuing to hire 50% women, if we're going to be losing them at 3 times the rate of men, we just are physically not going to be able to grow the business and get to where we were. Plus the fact, no more so in a consulting business where people always talk about that people are your assets, but people are really your assets in a consulting business where you develop them, upskill them, etc., and they become very valuable to the business. And again, we were losing them. So it started with a problem, and I suppose we tried to establish what the problem was. And this was, again, I'm sort of 10, 11 years ago. It was quite forward thinking, I suppose, at the time, but it was clearly based on a problem that was no longer sustainable and really unacceptable. I think Kieran used the phrase righting the wrong. We did a lot of workshops, we had a lot of feedback, we sat down and we tried to establish what was wrong, and really I think the feedback was very uncomfortable for a lot of people. It highlighted lots of things, unconscious bias. It highlighted things that people, when we sat back and looked at it in the cold light of day, was just unacceptable in terms of the way women in our organisation were feeling and the lack of opportunity they saw and advancement they saw. So what we did was we created a network within our business called the Accent on Women program, which was about advancing our females. It was about mentoring, it was about coaching, it was about just doing all the things we thought were based on the feedback would get a clear message across to all our female staff that there was a long-term career in Accenture. They could be promoted. They could do, in an organisation that was very much a meritocracy. People just thought if your career isn't on that sort of a trajectory, you can't. But we got the message out there that if women decided to make decisions like have children, that their career could plateau for a while before they took the next rung up and then. So we created very much, it was a culture change. And I think that's the challenge for lots of bigger organisations like Ingrid in Dell and indeed on Garda Síochána, but also Accenture, where you're dealing. It is about a culture change and having to do that. Now, the impact on the programme was tremendous, and we really turned the dial in terms of the attrition began to drop. Why? Because we had more women coming through at every level, at manager level, at senior manager level, at senior executive level, and that had the fantastic effect of, number one, creating wonderful role models. And one of the things we got on the early feedback was that a lot of our younger females could not see role models. They couldn't see women in the organisation staying and saying, I could be that person. And role models was key. So we began, and that's why we built it from the bottom up. We got more and more females staying, being promoted and driving that forward. And that had a huge effect. Another thing is, men were hugely important to the success of this programme. It wasn't a women's thing over there in the corner. It was something that had to be championed by men, particularly when it came to mentoring and coaching our women and bringing them on. And just to give you an example of where you can do this properly, I think in Accenture in Ireland we did it properly because we turned the dial. We went from having something like 10% of our senior executives within the organisation who were female to just short of 40%. We were about 38% of our senior executives were female. But that was the highest percentage of any Accenture office in the world, and we were very proud of what we had achieved because we had driven it. And it is a relentless, this is a difficult journey. Anybody who thinks that this is straightforward and you just, you set a few quotas and you set a few targets and it's a relentless focus that has to start in our graduate recruiting. When we're in our universities trying to recruit the best females we can get, we talk about our Accent and Women programme, we talk about the advancement and mentoring and career of women. It has to start on that. Now, to show you where it mightn't go as well, I sat on our UK and Ireland business, but in particular I sat on our UK business, much bigger organisation, 12,000 people. They had a different approach, and I think an approach that was not successful, and they just decided overnight, well, not quite overnight, but decided in a similar vein of looking at some of the issues that they were facing around attrition, etc., to set targets, and not quite quotas, but targets in terms of the number of females that they wanted to see at senior levels and on senior. And unfortunately, whereas that had the effect of creating a high percentage of females at senior levels very quickly, it did not have the same impact. So after a number of different years, there was a continuous issue around, was there the pipeline of female talent coming through and being promoted and getting to the next level? And they struggled with that because we had decided to build it from the bottom up and change the culture throughout the organisation, whereas they had decided to sort of change the dynamics at the top and hope that would flow down, and it really wasn't successful. So that's sort of an example.
Right, thank you, Mark. So bottom up, not top down. Ingrid, moving to you, there is evidence that there's a particular problem in what's called STEM, which is science, technology, engineering and maths. Now, that would affect a business like Dell.
Yes, of course, it's huge. So for us, it's been, and it goes back to being, inclusive. We want to be an organisation where everybody can be successful. But we're finding that we have a big challenge in just having the candidates coming to us. So, I was looking at a research, and there was a very disturbing stat from the US, and it was showing that in 1987 in the US, 37% of computer science students were female. That's gone down to 18%. So that's a huge challenge. And the question is why? Why are girls not coming into the STEM? This is huge growing industry. It's a really exciting industry, and that's been a big challenge for us. How do we get more girls coming in? And a lot of the research is showing that, we started going out to schools at about, we have a program called IT is Not for Geeks, which we share with a lot of other companies in Dublin. And we're going out to the schools, we're talking about it, but that's almost a little bit too late, because we're going out to the schools at maybe transition year. We actually need to get the students at about 7 or 8. So there's organisations like Code or Dojo or Code.org. really doing fantastic work. But it's a huge challenge for us. And it's one, this is not just our problem, it's a global problem. But we've got to get more girls into it. We've got to show them different things, So you see lots of funny things like Tech Barbie and, Scientist Barbie. But even that, there's an awful lot of, what we look at gender conditioning that's shown in the press that, portray men and women in different roles. In fact, an awful lot of that is not even just to mind STEM. But I was looking at an advert last week, and one day there were two stories. One was about executive cars, and there was a picture of a man. The other one was about executive leadership, and there was a picture of a man. So kids grow up, making associations with what we've been conditioned in the media. And when you go into schools, what always fascinates me is when we go in with this program, IT is not just for geeks, and we talk to the students at the beginning, the kids who are interested in the tech area or in the STEM area, it tends to be the boys. Now, our aim is obviously by the end of it to have, all the girls raise their hands, and they do. But a lot of them just haven't thought about this. And a lot of it, what we find is we've got to talk to the teachers, we've got to talk to the career counsellors, and most important, we've got to talk to the parents, because an awful lot of parents don't realise about all the careers that there are in the tech industry now. And that's huge for us. But it's a huge amount of work. So if you've got girls at home or you've got boys, talk to them about, and I always say to the young girls and boys, what do you do when you're on your iPhones, you're on your iPad? I mean, I have 2 young sons, and it's getting them off technology. But a lot of them don't think about actually working in this area. It's fascinating. And yet they all spend, so much of their free time, probably time when they're not meant to be, on the technology.
Right. Thank you, Ingrid. Gina, there's some evidence that, these issues are important to business from a kind of bottom line point of view. Do you have any insights on that?
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of work done in this space. There was a very recent study by the Harvard Business Review that looked at, I think, 22,000 companies globally. And they were actually able to show that the companies that had actually embraced gender diversity up to a level of 30% across the senior management team, across the board, that they had a very significantly better performance, bottom line performance, to the extent of 15% improvement in profitability. So there's a real economic benefit to diversity and to gender diversity. And it's partly because of the whole area, and I think Nóirín and Mark and Ingrid will all have seen this within their own sectors. It's about actually the talent resource that we have available to us. And if you took this on an economy-wide basis, as Kieran pointed out, the number of women at the kind of postgraduate study level is almost 50-50. Now, if that resource, which we have now invested as an economy, probably, more than 20 years of education in, if that is lost to the economy, it has a significant impact. In fact, there was another piece of work I came across that showed, and again, it's US research, that if there was full equality in labour market participation by women in the US, it would have a 5% increase in GDP. So there's an enormous resource out there that we are absolutely missing, both within companies and externally to our whole economy. And that should be a really, really good reason for us to address this. It's not easy to address, it's a complex issue. And it's everything from what the 7 or 8-year-old girl thinks to what the 30-year-old about to be a mother for the first time thinks, to what the 30-year-old male about to be a father for the first time thinks, plus senior management and culture within organisation. It's very, very complex. It actually takes a lot of careful, small changes to actually, I think, achieve change in this area.
And just, Gina, sticking with that report that you cited, again, thinking has moved on. It's a little bit like what Mark said about bottom-up works, top-down doesn't necessarily work. because initially it was put a woman on the board. But the findings of that research show that that actually doesn't have an effect. They have to be getting into senior management positions within their organisation. And it's not just enough to put a token on the top.
Absolutely not. And I mean, board members should be coming with good executive management experience. And if women aren't given access or don't have that experience, then they're not likely to be board candidates. But it's very, very clear from that Harvard Business Review that the companies that have a high representation, 30% or more on the board, also have 30% or more females in the senior management team. So it works both ways, and it really is about creating that culture of inclusivity. And it does come back to what Mark was saying, because I think organisations need role models. And actually, boards are probably the least visible bits of organisations in terms of a company or a firm. It's the senior management team that most people will interact with as the employees within that firm. So that's where you actually need the senior management to be representative of diversity.
Can I take a point on that? Just on the economic impact. And one of the things that always fascinates me is, when a company sends out a message, how inclusive is their message and their advertising. And there's been some work. There was a recent advert done by Red Bull. You might have seen it. It was a Heroes. It was all the men, super diving, sports, they were all fantastic. And then there was a comparison, just reading this article, and it was about a P&G ad, Procter & Gamble ad, and it was talking about, so it had all mothers in the ads. So both of those ads were very targeted. One was targeted, Red Bull, at the guys, we want you to buy our product. And the other was targeted at the mums, we want you to buy our product. And that's great, because a lot of ads will consciously target certain populations. A lot of ads don't even think about who they're targeting. But wouldn't it be fantastic, and I was reading this and it said, if Red Bull had somebody with the skirt in the ad, because they'd increase their impact. They wouldn't just be targeting half the population, but they might get all the women in the room too. And dads are parents. Dads change nappies. Dads give babies bottles. But every time you look at a lot of these adverts, they only target the mothers, and they leave out that other half. And particularly, now a lot of dads are stay-at-home dads. They are way more involved. And yet I feel that a lot of companies, they miss this opportunity. I always have to say, I walk through Dublin Airport every time, and there's a particular ad there. And obviously this company thinks that women are maybe only 15% of its customers, because it's got 5 guys in the ad and 1 woman in the corner, and everybody's white. And I don't really think that represents their customer base in Ireland. And these are the things about the economic impact, that this is what diversity is about. It's reaching your audience, which is totally diverse. So if we in our Dell adverts don't reach women, or we don't reach different nationalities or ethnicities, we miss out on our customer impact. For us, it's a huge economic impact, and we don't attract talent.
I think that's a really important area, Niamh, and a lot of companies are now looking at programs that actually embrace parenting. So it's not just about support to their female employees who've taken maternity leave, it's also support to new fathers. And I think that's really important, that sense of exclusivity. And, we've seen this in Scandinavian countries where they have a shared possibility, sometimes a longer maternity or parental leave if both mother and father share the period of time. So there's an incentive for fathers to take time at home with their children. But that in Scandinavia is one of a number of policies that has led to much higher participation of women in the workforce at large and at senior and on board levels.
Nóirín, would you like to add anything before I open the debate to the floor?
I'd just like to pick up on something that Gina said and maybe come back to something that Mark said, and particularly about creating not just opportunities, and it's not really about opportunities, but I suppose empowering and picking up on Gina's point, both men and women at a particular stage of their career to feel comfortable with putting themselves forward. And if I take that right into our organisation, which means that so we work as very dispersed right across 26 counties. So sometimes people are afraid to put themselves forward for promotional opportunities or even for lateral movement opportunities because it may mean that they are discommoded family-wise. That applies to men and women. And I think certainly for us, one of the challenges that we have is being able to empower people and make them feel comfortable that actually they can do that with a minimum amount of disruption. And just picking up something that Mark said, and I think it's true for quite a lot of public sector organisations, but I think it's particularly exclusive to Garda Síochána, and particularly when trying to empower young women. We're at, as I say, 26% of women, but the women are at a particular age bracket and a cycle in their life where they may choose to have children. And we at this point don't have the ability to actually be able to backfill with, let me term time people or people who can fill in. So actually picking up on Mark's point about giving people that opportunity in that space to actually allow them to have their children rear their families. And another interesting aspect of what we're seeing is elder care. And particularly for some of our older people, they're looking for time off, they're looking for, some people decide to take career breaks or other opportunities to share sibling care for elderly relatives. And that's something that surprised us quite a lot. So I think it is creating an atmosphere and empowerment where you can actually empower people to come forward, because I absolutely agree. I don't think there is any point in having a token representation. Very much agree with Mark's piece about the culture. It has to be bottom up, but it also has to be top down. And I think where you have it coming from both ends, that's where it actually has the most effective meeting in the middle.
Thank you very much, Nóirín. So what about some comments from you, please? Anybody like to get the debate going?
Thank you, and thanks to the panel for a great debate. My name is Fergus O'Dea, I'm with the NDRC. So for those of you who don't know us, we invest in early digital companies, so we're looking for entrepreneurs with good ideas to invest in, and we're funded by the state to do that. So we really see how underrepresented women are, particularly in the early tech entrepreneur space. I think what Professor O'Hogarty said around the relative levels of confidence and uncertainty between men and women really resonated with me. I think that's quite at the root of that problem. And again, like Gina said, we find that our ventures are all the poorer for that lack of diversity, and it's something we're actively working on with Enterprise Ireland at the moment. We're running a call for female founders who are looking for investment. We're working with them on their CSF fund to try and promote female entrepreneurs in this space. But given that the barriers to female entrepreneurs are not necessarily structural, they're more cultural, is there anything that can be done either at policy level or even at societal kind of cultural level to promote female entrepreneurship and to help women get over that barrier to be maybe less risk averse and maybe a little bit more delusional like the men are in terms of starting their own companies? So I'd be fascinated to hear the panel's opinion on that. Thank you.
Nice question, Fergus. Thanks very much. Anybody like to pick it up?
I think it's very interesting. In fact, I recently started working with a small technology company, PharmaPod, whose CEO is a Leonora O'Brien. She's a fantastic. She's one tech woman of the year, I think, last year, and that. And it's interesting talking to her about they've just successfully gone through second round funding, and there is, I think, that confidence thing is definitely there about, because I'm a woman and should we go out there and ask for it and position it and all that sort of stuff. But I think what is very clear, and it's back to the point I made earlier, if you have role models, if you celebrate the success, if you highlight these young female entrepreneurs, the more you do that, the more of the budding entrepreneurs will say, that could be me, I could be that person, versus it being very much, and males naturally sort of celebrate their success, even ahead of that success, but but it is around creating role models and creating a culture that we have a country and we have an ecosystem here, a technology ecosystem, which is fantastic for our economy, that has lots and lots of successful female entrepreneurs. And I think it is only by telling their story and highlighting them as real role models will you create that you know, if you like, that pipeline from the bottom up, where there are girls, as Ingrid alluded to, whether they're in college or whether they're deciding to do STEM subjects, and suddenly they can see these entrepreneurs and say, you know, that could be me, and that's hugely powerful. So that's one thing I think we should definitely do.
I think one of the other things is we talk a lot about biases or unconscious bias, and I think a lot of people are turned down, or people turn down female candidates, and they don't even realise that they're turning them down or why. But just to take it on aside, I had one leader say to me, he said, I'm pre-wired to hiring men, because in all the positions that he had previously hired, most of the people were men, and so he was kind of looking for those similar characteristics. And sometimes in this case, I think as well, so some of the people who are giving the funding are almost pre-wired to funding men, and they're not even realising that they're doing it, and that's quite a difficult thing to really to go back. And so it's highlighting the successes, highlighting the role models, showing that women can definitely do it. But it's very hard, because those perceptions that are there, you know, they say that if everybody was tasked to picture a leader, the majority of people will picture a man, because that's what we see in the media, that's what we've been conditioned to think, and it's only beginning to change. But that's a big cultural change.
Well, maybe, Ingrid, just to say that, you know, you've given an example of a man being programmed to hire a man, but here we've had two examples already tonight: the UCD Diploma in Corporate Governance Scholarship, Fergus's organisation funding specifically positive discrimination funding women, and so it's up to us women to take those opportunities and go for it. So I think that's a message.
Absolutely, and I mean, I think that when you look at diversity, you have to look at it from so many different points of view. That yes, I mean, when you read Sheryl Sandberg's book and she talks about leaning in, I think we need to do that too. I think we need to change the culture. I need to think, you know, we need to be inclusive. It's looking at it from a whole lot of different angles, and that's the absolute key. So we have to lean in, but we have to have the right culture as well.
Yeah. So another question, please.
Hi, I'm Paula McLaughlin. I've actually just recently moved back from London, where I was a senior executive in Accenture in the UK practice, so I can completely concur with what Mark described. I have a slightly alternative perspective in that when I made senior executive, I was subjected to quite justified snide comments in the corridor that the fact that I wore a bra didn't do me any harm in making senior executive, and I'd felt that a lot of the inclusion and diversity initiatives that were in place gave people a stick to beat me with. I was also assigned a coach in my first 6 months as a senior executive because I was a woman when my male counterparts weren't. And I can't help wondering if some of these inclusion and diversity initiatives, particularly in big corporates, start from the viewpoint of labelling the difference, accentuating the difference, when difference is the one inevitable. And perhaps we should stop talking about gender difference, sexual orientation difference, faith difference, and we should actually start talking about difference being the one inevitable, and how do we live with people that are not like us. So it's just a slightly alternative perspective that I wouldn't appreciate some comment on.
I totally agree. It's about appreciation differences. We actually had a programme that we ran, and it's interesting because a lot of people will come back with your feedback, and I think it's really hard, because I think we went, when a lot of companies started looking at diversity, they looked at gender. We did it, absolutely. We set up with women's networks, and we disengaged the men. We also disengaged some of the women. And that's been quite a challenge. And we've tried to, while we still have a focus on a lot of the different groups, we've tried to put the conversation around inclusion. What can we do to create that inclusive culture? So whoever you are, you can be successful. But it's quite a challenge. We've certainly had a lot of that feedback.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with that, because I think if I take my world, and certainly if I look back to my early days, it was never about who was a man or who was a woman. It was always about who could do the job best. And I think in doing that, we should value difference, because it does certainly help us, but I think the focus needs to be on inclusivity, not difference. And I think that's the really important thing. I think to get to where we need to be, we do have to actually focus, and back to Niamh's point about positive discrimination, we certainly, and I know in our recruitment campaigns, to get to where we need to be, we have to focus on particular elements, but the objective being to achieve inclusion and to make sure that we are reflective of the people that we serve. So I think that's an important aspect, but I absolutely agree, and I think I would have a similar experience in An Garda Síochána in the 1980s. There was a particular programme developed around new opportunities for women. It actually just served to allow what Mark describes as the women could be off over there and sure they're fine and they have some place to go. Where now it's much more about inclusivity, it's about people being there, having mature conversations about things that need to be done and challenging assumptions.
I don't think that in all of this conversation we can stop talking about the issue, because there is unconscious bias in the world and we have to talk about it. It's not just about gender, it's about race, it's about disability, it's about sexual orientation. There's all sorts of unconscious bias, and I think we all have to reflect and be made aware of how that exists in our lives, because by definition, we grow up with a particular kind of set of circumstances and reference points. One of the things that I think is really important is for companies is to kind of make sure that we address this area of unconscious bias. And that is also, you know, that point I was making about being as caring of new fathers as new mothers in the workplace, I think is part of that. We shouldn't assume parenting is about mothers or fathers. We should assume it is about both, where that is the case. And I think that there is also a responsibility on women themselves to think about this issue. One of the things that I find in my business of the Chamber of Commerce is that women, particularly senior women, are far less likely to come out and network. They are far less likely to be visible in the broader community of the work environment. And therefore, they're not providing the role models. They're also missing out on achieving all the social capital that networks can bring them and their business and the brands and companies that they're representing. So, you know, there's both challenge and facilitation in this. It's not a one-way street, but I think we've still got to keep talking about it, because the evidence suggests that we don't have complete equality as we would hope.
Thank you.
Just to add to that, I mean, I agree with what you've said. Unfortunately, which I said at the start, this is about, for lots of organisations, culture change. It's about change in behaviours. It's about change in attitude. It's about sorting out unconscious bias. It's just unacceptable stereotyping that goes on. And in order to really fix some of the things you talked about, you have to make it uncomfortable for people, that's why it's a difficult journey. And you can never stop, as Gina said. It's relentless. Even now, even though I've left Accenture, I know that there's a continuous focus and all that. But unfortunately, because of where we are, there are unacceptable cultural things that go on in organisations that need to get sorted out in order to really, you know, embrace the sort of overall equality that you're talking about. And if you don't do it, the problem will remain.
Right, one last question. Thank you.
My name is Caroline Casey. I come from the inclusive business case through the lens of disability. And the term positive discrimination has always sat really uncomfortably, because discrimination is discrimination, positive or not. And I'm just wondering, am I just being too precious?
Well, I think we have a really interesting example in this area of positive discrimination about to happen, because on Friday we will all go to the polls and vote. And for the first time ever, we have had a quota actually put in place for selection of candidates in the general election. It'll be really interesting to see how that comes out, and if it does do anything to increase the mere 19% of women that are in the Oireachtas in the current government. If you look at the experience of quotas generally, it's extremely mixed. In the political sphere, they have them in France. And I think they get about 28-29% into their National Assembly. They've no quotas in the UK, and they get the same percentage into the Houses of Parliament. So, you know, it's exactly the same for business. Countries that have quotas, they can have short-term benefit, but that sort of positive discrimination, I think really the jury is out on it. Does not always work, but it will be really interesting to see how it turns out for us in Ireland. Because in all of this area, actually, one of the things we're missing, and maybe this is something UCD could be looking at, is hard data on the Irish circumstances. We tend to be referring to international research.
I suppose, so you can look at it as a positive discrimination. We have lots of discussions because we have certainly groups that we want to have more people, because the difference is really important to a company. I think what's really key is, I suppose, if we have somebody coming to Dell, we want to make sure that they know they can be successful in Dell. And that's really important, so that they know whoever they are. And one of the things that I often talk about, even in our receptions, if you have an award around something, or you've been recognised for something you've done really well in an area. So maybe that's we, for example, have a resource group called True Ability. And if we won an award, we want to put that in reception, because if somebody comes in, our big challenge is a disability, for example, could be visible or it's not visible. They'll decide, can I tell the interviewer I may need some help, or will they discount me? So we want to kind of create that culture. And that for me and that's in a sense, it's a bit of is it a positive discrimination? It's not, but we want you to be able to tell us, I have a disability, be it visible or be it invisible. And then if you tell us, maybe we can help somebody who may need that help. They may not need much. But that's really important for us, because then right, well, I'll join this company. Whereas if I go to a company and I can't tell them, I'm hiding part of who I am, I probably won't be successful. Because if you hide who you are, that takes an awful lot of effort to hide. And we'd rather people put that into work rather than hiding who they are. So maybe that's around discrimination, but we definitely.
I'm just going to make a point to Caroline's point about positive discrimination. I suppose I've grown up in a world where sometimes I could be accused of being the token woman right throughout my career. And I think it's very important that there isn't positive discrimination, because I think then it's too easy to actually just label somebody as being something, whatever that something is. So what I think it's about is actually creating, I was going to use the word equal opportunities, it's not even that, it's an even playing field. And picking up on Ingrid's point, where a person can be their authentic self. And I think it's more holistic than gender or than race or anything like that. It's creating an even playing field where everybody can achieve their own potential and be their authentic self, and whatever that self is. And that is a challenge.
Thank you, Nóirín. Gina has urged us to keep talking about this. And so we're going to move on to that stage where we all continue the conversation. But before we move to that stage, I'm going to ask my colleague Orla Nugent just to wrap up this more formal part of this evening.
Thank you, Niamh. So I'm sure we all have learned that business and society and the economy is far better when we include everybody. And I suppose from our own point of view, we focus on diversity when we look at our student body and attracting students to come to the university. And our challenge then is inclusion, and we're starting to work with the whole area of unconscious bias. And as Niamh said in her ad break, we're delighted to continue our support of the 30% Club. And we will be continuing to offer a full scholarship for the Diploma in Corporate Governance. The closing date is Monday the 4th of April, so there's plenty of time to get your applications in. And as Kieran said, we strive to encourage females to join our MBA programmes. Our stats are in the 20%, 30%, and we really would like to see more female participants. So there's plenty of information here this evening at the table, so if you have any questions at all, just let me know, or you can contact us at mba@ucd.ie. And we will be having an event on the 9th of March, that's a Wednesday. And if you'd like to find out more about that event or any other events that the university has, just check out our website at www.smurfittschool.ie. And if you'd like to keep informed on this topic or follow us, please check out UCD Smurfit School on social media. Now it's my pleasure to say some thank yous. So I'd like to thank Professor O'Hogarthig for opening the event this evening, and Professor Niamh Brennan for moderating the discussion this evening, and our panellists who shared their insights, knowledge and observations so generously with us. I'd like to thank my colleague Tara Collins, Alumni Director, Mary O'Connor, PwC and Country Lead of the 30% Club, Breed Horan, Non-Executive Director of FBD, and 30% Club Steering Committee member, for working with us to put this event on this evening, and we're delighted that you all joined us as well. It's been a fantastic turnout. I'd like to thank Avril Donoghue and Aoife Mulqueen, who actually did all the hard work, and to the MDPs and our MBA students who assisted here this evening in making the event run so smoothly. Special thanks to the MBA Alumni Association for their assistance throughout the process. I'm nearly at the end. So finally, tonight is about you. It's about our alumni network, our students, our colleagues, our corporate partnerships and friends. It's about all of you and how you make a difference. And I hope that you've learned some new ways of thinking so that you can bring that forward tomorrow into your lives. And we'd now like to invite you to continue networking and discussing the topic in hand. I know we haven't had a lot of time for questions, but I'm sure there'll be plenty, and there'll be plenty of time, and we'd like to invite you for drinks and canapes in the lobby. So thank you very much.